everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. Appreciate you joining us on a Thursday. Our guest today, Abhinav Asthana, who is the CEO and founder of Postman, had the best excuse ever for changing a meeting time, and that is because there's a new baby in your life. Thank you for making time for us today.
Thanks so much for having me and being accommodating, Karen. We have a 6-month-old and, takes mornings are interesting.
I can only imagine. And again, I really appreciate you making time, and congrats on the new baby. So I feel like I've sort of had Postman sort of floating around my life, but never quite understood quite what Postman did or who you were as an organization. So I'd love for that to be our focus today, is just to talk a bit about the company, how it got started, and then sort of your leadership journey through part of that. So if we could start, maybe you can talk about Postman for those who aren't familiar. I know you originally started it as a side project, and maybe it was free on the web store or something.
Yes. So Postman has evolved quite a bit since I first started, but I'll go back to its founding, where it started out as a solution for my own personal pain point of working with APIs. So I've been a developer for most of my life. I got my first computer in fifth grade. I started coding and I was building lots of different apps. But as the web evolved, as you had mobile applications and then eventually the cloud, I started noticing that I was working more and more with APIs. And that reflected in the first company I founded. It was also at Yahoo. I was in Bangalore there, and they were building large applications. And as you progress and you build bigger applications, you end up working a lot with these things called APIs that connect these applications together. That's kind of in a nutshell what an API does. So I found out that as a developer working on these things, there were no good tools out there. And this really became kind of a side project that I created. I used to work it on the side, and I started finding it very useful, during the day. And I just put this out there. My coworkers started using it, and then the wider community started using it, and it just kind of picked up its own life. So we started as a free Chrome Web Store plugin, and then in 2014 we formally started as a company, which I'm happy to dig into if we go there.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, and that is the best way, right? Just addressing your own pain point and realizing that now many millions of other people have the same pain point. I did some work in the past with Ross Mason and MuleSoft before Salesforce acquired them. And my short paraphrase and memory of that story was that he had a pain point, and his wife was complaining that he was always complaining about the same pain point. He should just fix it. And he did. And that went on to be whatever it was, a $6 or $8 billion acquisition by Salesforce. And of course, a lot of value added to the market.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit more about what it is that Postman does with APIs. And then we can talk about sort of the company and its current state.
Great. Yeah. So Postman in today's form is an API collaboration platform. And what I mean by that is when you're building an API or you're using an API, you require all of these different tools, all the way from designing an API, documenting it, testing it, and publishing it, to consuming an API, where you find out an API for the first time, you evaluate it, you try it out, and you integrate it into your own application. So there are lots of these steps in the process where lots of tools and lots of people are involved. And what we do for developers, teams, and enterprises is we kind of bring them all together on a common platform. Prior to Postman, and as you referenced, even companies like MuleSoft, like either they would solve a very specific part of the problem, or people would build like their own solutions. Like that's how I ended up kind of doing this. And I was actually initially surprised. Like I'm like, APIs have existed forever. Why hasn't anyone solved this before?
Yeah.
I didn't really feel like special, building this thing at that time. But as Postman got adopted by developers, we found out that this is a huge unmet need in the market. And really, developer tools are very special in a sense that it requires deep domain knowledge for a company to be able to build it. And APIs can be very, very complex. It can be something as simple as checking the weather. Like so, if you see your weather app on your phone, it's calling an API by the National Weather Service, or it can be as complex as processing like a payment transaction where you have to validate fraud. And in today's age, you also have a lot of AI APIs. So building all this requires coordination, evaluation, kind of governance and standards that companies need to deploy. So that's what we help companies do today. And our product is designed in a modular way, and it can, customers can scale their usage. If even if they're a single developer, they can get value out of Postman. If they're a team of 10, 20, 100, they can get value out of Postman. Or we have customers where there are thousands of developers working together on one common platform.
Wow. So I know that Postman is now valued at something like $5.6 billion. That's billion with a B, and used by, if my research is right, about 35 million developers and 500,000 organizations worldwide, including 98% of the Fortune 500. We got to work on those last 2%. Talk about the transition of going from free into what you've become today. I mean, it's an amazing story of product-led growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been a fantastic experience, and I think in some ways we have just followed like customer needs all the way through. So when I started Postman and I got together with my co-founders, we had this whole experience of building lots of very complicated things. And oftentimes when you're building like a very large product suite, first it takes a lot of time. You have lots of ambitions that don't meet reality on the ground. And you actually also burn a lot of money. So while we, over the years, we raised a lot of money, we actually got started with a very small, Series A investment of 7 million. And prior to that, we actually also, kind of were in this ramen profitable bootstrap mode for a while. And the way we led product development was we would release a product, be very active to developer feedback. And we knew this is a very complex space where we had to let developers and companies who were better than us to kind of lead us. So we had users from Box, Cisco, Google, Microsoft. All these companies were like that back then. And what we did was basically looked at, okay, this is the most important problem for us as a company to solve right now, and that is what we're going to focus on. And then once we have crossed that milestone, then we're going to go to the next. So as an example, when we were the free product and we started to raise money, the challenge was, is there a business model here? So when we talked to people and saw that they were struggling in sharing APIs with each other, we focused on API collaboration for a team as the key problem to solve. So we built a prototype. Because we had hundreds of thousands of developers trying out Postman like every day, we could pull in from that audience and say that, listen, we are building this stuff. Are you interested? And I think we ran a beta program with about 500 to 800 companies back then. And because all three co-founders were developers, we were just building. So we are listening to customers, and then we are just building. And we put our prototype out, and we put a price point out, and we asked people to opt in. And I think about 30-40% of that cohort basically converted in the first month of us launching the service itself. So we have the story that we tell often, that we were testing our online payment feature so that you could pay online. And one of my co-founders was demoing this feature live to the company, and he hit production. He hit ship to production, and within the demo, we had our first sale. And we were like, oh my God, this code works, we're so excited. And then he's like, oh, this is actually our first customer. So we got our first customer, and then everyone was like, oh, okay, where are the bugs? Now we got to pay someone. So that's how, we kind of kept this beat on, that, we have these cycles. We're going to go fix, problem to solve, let it have our customers kind of lead the way and really be intent about it. And then over time, as customers wanted, like an API design solution, they wanted documentation, they wanted test automation, all of these capabilities got added onto the platform.
Great. So you said in that your first round, your Series A was like 7 million. I think today maybe you've raised over 400 million.
That's correct.
How did you choose who to take your money from? How did you pick your investors?
Yeah, that's I think an extremely important kind of question, and I'm
Mm,
glad you kind of asked it. So, with each funding round, I believe that, as I look at the milestone ahead, is this the right partner for this journey? So, with Nexus, for example, they had a cross border footprint. They were based in the US and they were based in India. And we
mhm.
started out in India and we were very intent on coming to the US. And I wanted, to be in the Bay Area to create a category leading company. In fact, one of our first offices was next to MuleSoft, who you referenced. And
Yeah.
initially, we actually didn't have chairs, so I was going to go and ask them that, we want to go get chairs from your office. Didn't do it. But kind of, with our first investor, moving to the US was a very high priority. I think with our second investor, really adding that competence of SaaS, API
Mm,
technology, having a right board partner was the second, most important criteria for us. We didn't want to raise more money than we needed. We
smart.
always looked at financial milestones. We're like, okay, we don't want to tell you too much. We don't want to have too many investors. And then in the third and fourth rounds, we are looking at who's going to be the strategic partner for the next 4 or 5 years. So, in the sense that we want, as we do M&A, as we look at
Mhm,
scaling sales and marketing, who are the people we can bring on board? What is the network that they bring to the company? So, in the D round, we pick people who have been at stellar, like 100 billion, 200 billion plus market
mhm,
cap companies.
mhm.
And, I kind of wanted to be around those people and learn from those people. So, that's how I kind of went through the progression of picking those investors.
Yeah, so smart. I, at least in my experience, you can't overvalue the importance of alignment between both what you need and the investor brings, and money is certainly a part of that. But it's that other sometimes more intangible stuff that makes the difference, because investors bring money to everything, but not all companies that they invest in are successful. And I think it's
Yeah.
this match that you're talking about, where there's intentionality that can actually execute. And so, really
Yeah.
smart. I'm glad to hear.
Absolutely. Actually, that reminds me of one more point that you bring up, right? Like we were also very clear at which phase of the journey, which type of business model we want
Mhm.
to work with. Like the traditional playbook going back, in 2016, 17 was that once you have a product, you have to get enterprise sales and you spend like a lot of money on sales and marketing. And then, companies like Atlassian and Datadog and a bunch of others were coming up on this PLG track. And while I'm not a full believer on that, you should either just be a PLG company or a sales-led company. But
Right.
with investors, we were very clear that this is where we are. So we don't want to be pushed into a direction that you and I don't believe in. And that conversation has to happen before, you sign the term sheet versus, you sign the term sheet, the money comes in, and I think everyone celebrates that moment. And after that, you're like, okay, what have we done?
Yeah, exactly. It's like when there's an M&A event, right? A lot of people get paid for making the deal, but not so many for making the deal work. Same thing here, right? Getting the money is great, but the money's got to make the project or the organization work. So again, great job. So I want to talk a little bit more about API specifically. So I mean, they're clearly essential for software development today. I wonder how you see their role evolving over the next 5 years or so, and also what impact. We have to talk about AI sometime in here. We'll do it now. What role do you see AI have in terms of impacting API development and testing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, APIs have continued to grow in importance. I think while as a technical abstraction, developers always knew about them. But in terms of their business value, as you see the progression of companies going all the way back to like, TIPCO, Boomi, MuleSoft, then Apogee kind of later, which was acquired by Google. Over time, there is more and more alignment between business leaders and engineering leaders. Business leaders have started seeing APIs as a revenue driver, and
Mhm.
in some cases, actually building a platform moat around their companies. Like Salesforce, as the reason they bought MuleSoft was Salesforce has a fantastic like API ecosystem through which like thousands of apps actually connect to Salesforce, and every connection makes Salesforce more valuable. And if you look at the rise of API companies like Stripe, which are purely like API product companies, you see companies making revenue out of it. So over time, there has been a lot of recognition among leaders across all industry verticals that we have all of this infrastructure that we can expose digitally for
Mm-hmm.
most people to connect to, and that's just like outside the company. Internally, like when we talk to like the sectors which don't have core technology products as their focus, they have a lot of inefficiencies that they can solve for with APIs. They end up making applications over and over again. So in a typical bank, you'll find out that there are 100 ways of doing the exact same app, except that the app is tuned for the US market or the Canadian market or the Asian market, but it's actually the same app. So the right way which engineering leaders have figured out is that, okay, we've got to have a common set of APIs that really are the core capabilities of the organization,
Mm-hmm.
which we need to reuse within the company. So that's the second axis where APIs, will continue to be critical. I think the third lever for companies is basically partner APIs, where
Mm-hmm.
if you're partnering between two organizations, instead of sending data over databases or lots of things that are kind of poor alternatives, you basically have an API that you expose to your partners. And some companies that we work with have thousands of partners in their ecosystem as well. So the way we categorize it, there are internal APIs, there are partner APIs, and public APIs, and each of them should be recognized by business leaders in alignment with their engineering leadership to drive either efficiency or revenue, for the company, and that continues to grow in importance. We actually helped popularize this idea of API first a while ago, and when we started in 2017, business leaders like CIOs, CTOs were like, we know APIs, but we categorically are not API first. But over
Mm-hmm.
time, we have seen that percentage change and evolve over time.
Yeah. Well, it's more efficient, it sounds like, and more effective. And yeah, makes a lot of sense. So I know you also created something called the State of API Report, which you've been doing for a number of years now. I saw the 24 report. When does the 25 report come out? And what are some highlights?
Yeah, I think we'll run the survey soon. I think we run it like mid-year after people
Mm-hmm.
are settled in a little bit. So, but I'll have to get back on the specific dates for that.
Okay, so sometime in the fall. But the 24 report in and of itself was an interesting read. So look forward to the update. What's next for Postman? What do you see coming next for you?
So we are very excited about our roadmap. I think we are building core capabilities on the platform, whether it's better API design tooling, whether it's tools for publishers. One thing that has really gained traction among the developer community as well as API publishers is our public network. We now have thousands of APIs by companies like Meta, Stripe, Salesforce. They publish on the Postman platform today to make APIs more consumable for developers. And our intent is always to go back to the developer and look at how can we make their job easier.
Mm-hmm.
So we have more companies kind of coming on board. I think we're going to be investing in community features. And our goal on the publisher side is to just have your API be used by hundreds of thousands of developers. So these developers we have on our community who are basically there to use APIs, you'll have access to them as well. We are investing a lot in AI. We announced an AI agent builder solution, which we are seeing a lot of early traction and excitement towards. I think this could be a good segue to talk about AI for a bit as well.
Sure.
Like last year, we saw that customers are trying out a lot of AI APIs in Postman. And if you see the growth of AI in general, the reason why it's grown so quickly is instead of the technology being available in kind of a closed box, like enterprisey way, it's just available as an API for any developer to use. And what we're seeing now is that like these AI APIs need to be combined with other APIs for agentic applications, which
Mm-hmm.
is just another evolution of how apps are going to evolve for the next kind of decade. Uh, so as we looked at the trends, we looked at where developers are, what customers want to build. We thought we could really leverage the capabilities we already have, the APIs that are there on the network to help developers build agents faster. So that's our newest release. We announced in January and we're going to keep investing in the AI space a lot to really help with the coming evolution of agents.
Great. Well, that's a lot. I'd like to talk for just a minute as well about you and your leadership. So, I believe this is your first gig as a CEO. You've been a founder before, a CTO, so not inexperienced in the C-suite, but first time as a CEO. What has that leadership journey been like for you? Is the CEO role one that you aspired to? Is it just what seemed to make sense with the founders that you had? How did that come to be?
Yeah, I think calling my previous company the C-suite would be an overstatement, but we did what
Mini
we
suite?
could.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a mini suite, like we talked about mini certs, right? I think with Postman, I was very intentional that if you have an idea and you have a vision, you want to make it succeed as the CEO. And for everything that I would build before, I would typically have this thought that okay, sales and marketing could be done by just a cable CEO. I was very introverted. I just would code all day, and I'm like, I don't want people around me. And I really had to evolve out of that persona, or actually develop the skill set consciously that this is something I just have to learn to be a leader. Like you can't be a
Yeah.
leader, if you're not in front of people. So this was a very conscious decision on my part. Of course, I always believed that if I'm not, if I don't have the skill set and the company is not going to be successful, then that's something I would not want to do. So there was a very conscious, effort from my part to learn how good CEOs operate. I had a bunch of advisors around me who had been CEOs of specific scale companies.
Mhm.
And then over time, I learned from a lot of mentors and other people around. I read as many books as I could find. I, had eventually like you could get all the advice and you could get all the books, but I also had experiences, both good and bad, that helped me shape, how I communicate as a CEO, how we resolve conflicts, how we get people to really focus on an ambitious goal and kind of
Mhm.
still, even if you're failing, still make progress. I think through the years, the pandemic, the crash in the markets in 2021, 2022 were a good stress test outside of just trying to build a company in a distributed way across like India and the US. So all of these things I felt are things that, really like help you,
Yeah.
in terms of experiences, become a better CEO. I think finally I have a fantastic team around me. I
Mm.
always, initially when you start out, you are doing everything yourself, but having I guess for future founders, the understanding and the courage to step back and say, okay, I'm not good at this. I need to
Yes.
bring in someone more. I think is critical. So every time I would fail, I would look at it. I'm like, why am I here? What am I trying to do? And it's very, very appealing as a CEO founder to go into it and just try to do everything. So I got, was fortunate to get great people around me, starting with my co-founders and then eventually the leadership team as it came in and changed over time. And but I still am very close to the details of everything that happens at Postman. I think you can't lead just by being at the back seat and just having other people drive all the time.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it sounds like that is the game plan for becoming a great CEO. So, any favorite books? You mentioned that you read a bunch of books as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Most
the ones that
influential. Yeah.
yeah, we give out a few to every person at Postman. I think the one that influenced me initially was Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull of Pixar.
Mhm.
I had this question in my mind, like, how do you manage like people who are very creative, but still when you have to produce a movie, like how do you even get it done? So I'd been watching Pixar movies since I was a kid, and I was like, I just love to know how this comes together. So that's one of my favorite books. I go back to that often. I think High Output Management by Andy Grove
Mm.
was something that it's my go-to book. I read a lot of sentences, and it's been interesting to see, how much you actually practice and what happens, after you read a book. And then I think Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel
Mm.
Kahneman was one
Awesome.
of my favorite books. Which
Yeah.
the one thing I learned was like at the end, Kahneman says that even as a professor, I can't remember all these rules that I have just told you about in the book. But just knowing that the category that you typically fall in and what are the biases and flaws of that category will help you avoid a bias.
Yeah.
So I kind
Yeah.
of tend to go to that rule often.
Yeah. I think that's 80% anyway of great development. It's just knowing what your preferences are, which are also your biases, and just be aware of them. And then you can make decisions when the time comes about whether you want to play into that or you need to go a different path. So I love that set of books. Thank you for sharing that. I also wanted to talk a little bit about sort of decision making as a CEO. I know that ambiguity is a great part of decisions that have to be made in the C-suite in general, but particularly for the CEO, because if the decisions were easy, they would have been made earlier, right? They would not have gotten to the CEO. So they're more like 49-51 decisions now, not quite clear on which way to go. And yet we also have to take action. So there's this ambiguity and bias for action that are in tension with each other. Yeah. How do you make decisions in that environment?
Yeah, there are quite a few, challenges, especially when you just have an unknown or like a massive set of unknowns like around you. I tend to really gather a lot of different viewpoints from different people, gather a lot of data as much as it's around before we have a decision to make. And I do follow the Bezos model of like one way doors and two-way doors. So I think the first thing to identify is this a one-way door or a two-way door? And if it is a one-way door, we are more deliberate about action. We go into the thinking slow mindset, and when it's a two-way door, we just try to think fast. I try to, when we're working as a team, I try to get people towards focusing on the big picture, things like North Star metrics, the mission and vision, what kind of company we want to be, to really factor that in and take, if it's a small decision, we just have to take it and move past it and come back to it later. But if it's an important decision for those things, then we think a lot about it. I think after taking a decision, there's a tendency, and even I have it sometimes, like, did I take the right decision? And you spend a lot of time thinking about it. Once you've taken a decision, you just go for it. And I think the lack of a decision at that point and second guessing is actually more harmful than just taking a decision and moving forward. And eventually, I think, over a few months, sometimes like with C-level decisions, you find out in a few years that whether you were right or wrong. So I do go back to it from time to time to see, okay, has my decision making capability like improved? And I think, even with things like AI, before jumping into building AI agents, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go read up as much as I can about LLMs. I'm gonna go practice building an LLM. I'm going to go and talk to the best people I can find. And then we would take a more deliberate decision towards it, hoping that in the next 3 to 5 years, we have made the right bets right now. Versus AI is here, it's the hype, so let's jump in. That's not how I would have done it.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for all of that. It's easy to see how you've been so successful. I know it's not been so easy to do because high growth companies never are. It's just not a straight line. But it's easy to see with your product and your conscious approach to being a CEO and a leader of your organization. So thank you again for being here, and I wish you and your team all the best.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, Karen.
Great. Take good care.